Things have gotten so crazy and out of hand. I used to think we were living in the Twilight Zone. But now that I've taken some time to really think about this, I'm convinced that we're living in the upside down. Everything is inverted. You think about all the stuff in our daily lives and what we're led to believe versus what is true, it's all backwards. And I've got 8 specific things that I'm going to run by you, and let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree with these. But these 8 things are things that has impacted my personal life in very profound ways in some cases. And you know, throughout my entire life, or most of my life, I was led to believe something was true when in fact the truth was the complete opposite. So the first thing, food. Our food system is completely upside down. Because you think about the information they put out to us, and they actually are telling us now that Fruity Pebbles are healthier than ground beef. Who am I to judge, right? All I know is that when I stopped eating that kind of food and I started eating real whole foods and I centered my diet around meat and animal products, my health completely transformed, because there was a time in my life in the not so distant past where I was very, very sick. I was on the brink of death. And after being failed by the medical industry, I took matters into my own hands. I made that change and I fixed myself without without pharmaceuticals. I'm not saying that's going to work for everybody, but it just really highlights the fact that what we're told about food and nutrition is actually completely false. We should not be eating stuff that is made in a lab. We shouldn't be centering our diet around food products that are made by humans. We should be eating what is natural, what is from the earth, because everything that we need to thrive is all around us. We don't need anything else. We have these big old brains and we're so sophisticated, yet we overcomplicate things. And we believe that what was put here on earth somehow isn't good enough, so we have to create our own food. And that ties into the next thing that is completely upside down, and that is the medical industry. And I'm not saying the medical industry doesn't play a part, and it's not a good thing, because it definitely is. It's great for critical illness. If you have a wound or an injury, our medical industry is one of the best industries on the planet. But when it comes to sick care and it comes to curing people, we fall short. And the reason for that is because we don't focus on curing the patient. We focus on treating symptoms. We focus on alleviating symptoms. And a lot of that means taking pharmaceuticals. We're one of the only countries in the world that advertises pharmaceuticals on TV. And there's a reason for that, because it's very, very profitable. So instead of focusing on the patient and trying to cure people, we focus on stringing that out as long as you possibly can so that we can make that industry richer. And that's really what all this is about. And that's what all the food issue is about too, is because a lot of these things are very profitable and it's all about money. And that also ties into the next thing that is completely backwards. And that is the idea that we need to celebrate and be okay with being obese, with being sedentary, and with being sick. We think it's normal now. Actually, we've normalized it. And that's a big problem, because when you're overweight, when you're obese, when you're sick, when you're sedentary, when you're all these things, then you're probably not going to be as healthy as somebody who has a healthy body composition. And that's not to say that people that are overweight or obese or sick are somehow inferior. It just means that we shouldn't celebrate that. We should be focusing on getting people healthy and creating a healthy lifestyle for themselves. But instead, we just say, you know what? It's okay to be overweight. It's okay to be sick. It's okay to be sedentary. You can do whatever you want in life, which is absolutely true. You can. But the problem here is that it ties into all the other stuff I just talked about, because there's money in people being sick. There's money in people being overweight. Because when you're sick and overweight, you're more likely to go on medications. You're more likely to need medical care. And you're more likely to buy a lot more food in some cases. So again, a lot of this comes down to money, but it's completely backwards the way we go about this. And again, that's not to degrade anybody that's unhealthy, overweight, or obese, because there are other factors that can tie into that. It's not always diet and nutrition related, and it's not always related to being sedentary. But instead of ignoring lifestyle and diet, that should be the main focus, but it's not. Instead, we just blow it off and say, it's okay. Don't make any changes, but here's a pill. Or here's an injection. Here's something you can take that's a shortcut that's going to cost you money, by the way, and you can never get away from it, because if you do, you're going to revert back to exactly the way you were before. But just take this thing instead of changing something about your life. And another thing that is completely backwards is relationships. All the stuff that is shoved in our face every single day, the stuff you see on social media, the mainstream media, TV, entertainment in general, it makes us believe that we all have to be surrounded with people our entire lives. And if we're not, then there's something wrong with us. And it also makes us believe that the hookup culture is a good thing, and that we should all be cheating on our spouses, and infidelity is healthy and natural, and divorces are okay, and we should celebrate those and have divorce parties. And all these weird things that shouldn't really be happening, all that stuff is upside down. Because instead of focusing on hooking up with as many people as you possibly can and having strings of meaningless relationships, and getting married before you're ready just because somebody says you should, and having kids even though you don't believe you should, and getting a divorce because things don't work out and you're just ready to throw in the towel, or maybe something better came along so you're ready to trade up. Instead of doing all that stuff, we should be focusing on building meaningful relationships with the right people. We should be focusing on attracting the right people. But the problem here is that we can't do that, because when you're constantly surrounded with people, because we're led to believe we have to be, or else, again, there's something wrong with us, then there's a pretty good chance that you're attracting the wrong kind of people in your life just because you feel like you have to have someone in your life at all times. And that can be a very easy way to fall into toxic relationships. And toxic relationships are eventually going to go sour, which will eventually lead to divorce. And oh, by the way, divorce is another thing that's completely upside down, because when you get divorced now, instead of focusing on the family unit and allowing both parents to have joint custody of the children, it's usually skewed one way or the other. And in a lot of cases, and I would say most cases, it's skewed in favor of the woman, where the woman usually gets custody. And the dad usually becomes a 15% father. He gets the kids on the weekends. And to me, that's completely backwards, because to maintain a healthy relationship with your children, if there is a divorce, custody should be split 50-50. That way, the kids have a father figure in their lives. Because we have seen the detrimental impacts of children not having a strong father figure in their lives, and it is not good. So instead of doing what we're doing now and giving custody to one parent or the other, we should make it more equal. And not only that, but we should be striving to create a culture that does not celebrate these things. Again, this whole thing is completely backwards and it's upside down, and I do feel like that is having a very negative impact on the family unit and on relationships and people in general. So at some point, we have to ask ourselves, why does everything seem to be geared against the family unit? I think we can all speculate, but I think deep down, we kind of know the answer. And that brings me to the next thing that is completely upside down, and that is all of this division that is being sown into our daily lives. That should not be happening. When you think about a thriving civilization and a strong civilization, the last thing that's probably on your mind is the fact that everybody in that civilization is completely divided. But that's kind of where we're at right now, because we are divided over everything. Race, religion, politics, sex, food, I mean, you name it. If there's something we can be divided on and something we can disagree on, we're divided on it. And a lot of that stems from external factors. Again, there's this weird narrative that's being sown into our daily lives that pits us against our fellow man. And that's a very bad thing, because, again, when you think about a strong civilization, that's the last thing you think. And that is exactly what's happening. We are no longer strong. We're not as strong as we used to be, because unity is where it's at. Unity is where we thrive. And when we are united, we are the strongest that we can possibly be. But when we're divided, that's probably when we're going to fall. And if you think about civilizations throughout history, one of the primary ways that those civilizations fell, and one of the easiest ways that caused that, is that they were very divided. Something was injected into that civilization, whether it be an idea, a belief. Typically it was religion. But when these ideas become so different and no one can agree on anything, that's when everything kind of falls apart. And this is another big question that we have to ask ourselves, is why is all this division being sown into our daily lives? And another big question that we have to ask ourselves is, why are we letting it? And something else that's completely upside down and backwards is this belief that all this materialistic crap is somehow going to make us happy. We now live in this consumerism society, and it's all about having more. It's all about needing more. All of us need the next, newest, nicest thing. We have to trade up. We have to have the biggest house, the newest car, the nicest car, the new cell phone, the new technology, the new fill in the blank. That's what most of our society is geared around. And to me, that is completely backwards. Because if you look at some of the most successful people in the country, those people are often the most miserable. And it is because they spend their entire lives working to get all of the money and all of the things that they've wanted their entire lives, thinking that those things are the things that are going to make them happy. They think that those things are going to be the things that fulfill them, until they get those things. And then they realize it didn't do anything to make them happy. As a matter of fact, the void that they had in their heart and in their soul is now much bigger because, again, they did spend their entire life working for these things that they thought was going to make them happy, and it didn't, and now they're completely lost. They have no sense of direction, and they're wondering now, what is my purpose? What am I actually striving towards? It can leave you very, very confused, and I'm actually somebody who went through that very thing because I worked almost 20 years of my life, and for the first, I would say 10 years of that, I was focused on materialistic stuff. I was focused on the hookup culture and trading up and doing all these things that I thought was going to make me happy. And then I got all these things, and I pretty much now have everything in my life materialistic that I could ever possibly want. And I realized that none of that stuff actually matters. And what actually did matter is the stuff that you can't put a dollar amount on. It's the experiences. It was traveling the world, seeing different places, experiencing different cultures, trying different foods, meeting people, building meaningful relationships, exploring the natural beauty of the world. Those are the things that ended up mattering to me. And I believe that those are the things that should matter to most people, because if you think about our entire existence, those are the things that mattered. We never had access to all this stimulation and all this materialistic stuff throughout all of history. But now we've been thrown into this new world, and that's what everything's about, and we can't align with it. And I think that's why a lot of people feel lost and hopeless, and they can't seem to find their sense of purpose. And another major thing that is completely upside down is the lack of financial education, and I would say practical knowledge, practical skills, life skills, those kinds of things. Throughout school, I was never taught any of that stuff. And for the most part, I don't think hardly anybody is. I mean, think back on your life. Did you get proper financial education? Did you get education about investing and building actual skills that you would need later in life? And I'm somebody who graduated high school, and then I went on to get a college degree, and then I went on later again to get another college degree. And through all of my training, all of my education, never once was I taught any of this stuff. I was never taught about how to budget, how to invest, how to set yourself up to be successful in life. I was never taught about business. I was never taught about practical skills to survive, how to rent, how to get an apartment, how to buy a house, how to buy a car, things to look for, none of that stuff. If you're going to get that kind of education, it has to come from the parents. And the way society is set up now, things are very expensive, so now both parents have to work. So the chances of a kid getting that kind of education is going to be pretty slim, because the parents simply aren't around enough to teach the kid those practical, fundamental life skills. And again, let me know down in the comments below if you received any of that kind of formal education through the public education system or even the private education system. I would say that in most cases you probably didn't. And if you did get that kind of education, it probably came from your parents. So again, this is another major question we have to ask ourselves. Why aren't we taught these fundamental life skills? And again, we can only speculate, but it kind of seems to be by design. So with all that said, what can we do about all this? Now that we know that everything's upside down and the opposite is actually true about most of the things that we've been told in life, what do we do? And I think the answer to that is exactly what we're doing right now. If you're watching this video, you're aware of these problems. And the first step to solving a problem is being aware that there's a problem. And in our daily lives, we're faced with a lot of problems. But the great thing about that is that we also hold the power to overcome these problems. And in this case in particular, for every single one of the things we just talked about, overcoming these problems is as simple as doing the opposite of what we're led to believe, doing the opposite of what we're told. Because obviously, if what we're being told is backwards and upside down, and the opposite is true, then if we feel like we're in a bad position right now, and we've been doing all the things that we're led to believe is true, then it makes sense that that is not the right path to follow. And it also makes sense that if we do the opposite, the outcome might be a little bit better. So maybe that's all it takes. And for me, that is exactly what it's taken. I'm somebody who has forged my own path, and I've kind of done the opposite of a lot of the things that we've been told. And it took me years and decades to get to this point. But once it got to that point and the veil had been lifted from my eyes and I could see things for what they really were, the moment I started going against the grain and forging my own path and doing the opposite of what we're told is the moment my life changed forever. Instead of working until I was 65, I retired at 39. Could I have worked until I was 65? Absolutely. Would I have had a lot more money had I have done that? Absolutely. But I also witnessed people all around me that were working until they were 65. And then they would get out and they realized that they were too old to do the things in life that they wanted to do. And one of the biggest regrets that they had is that they didn't get out sooner. At a certain point in my life, I also stopped subscribing to the idea that we need all this materialistic crap, and I stopped buying stuff. And that allowed me to save a lot more money. And instead of blowing my money on a bunch of materialistic stuff and constantly trading up and needing more, I did the opposite of that. I saved as much money as I possibly could, and I drove beater cars, and I lived a kind of minimalist lifestyle. I was very frugal, and that alone allowed me to be able to retire at the age of 39 without having ever invested. And I didn't invest because I was never given that type of financial education. But now, later in life, I'm now doing the opposite of that, and I'm starting to invest, and I'm starting to see the massive earning potential that investing can actually have. And I will say with 100% certainty that investing is one of those things that I should have done a long time ago when I first started my career. But now that I'm doing it now, it is changing my life. And something else that completely transformed my life that I mentioned at the beginning was undoing all the ideologies and all the deeply held beliefs that I had about food, diet, and nutrition. Because like I mentioned before, the moment I did that was the moment my health transformed. And that right there was the moment in time where my life transformed forever. And that is actually what started me down this path. And that's what lifted the veil from my eyes about all these other things. Because by having those types of deeply held beliefs, I had blinders on, and it kept me from seeing the truth. But the moment I stepped outside of that, and I was willing to allow myself to be uncomfortable, that's the moment that everything changed. And really what this all boils down to is realizing that we all have a choice. We all hold the power to shape our reality into whatever we want to make it. We just have to remember to maintain a positive outlook and be grateful. Be grateful that you're not one of the people that has blinders on. You're not one of the people that has your head buried in the sand. You are one of the few that sees the truth. And that alone is something to be grateful for. Because that one simple fact is going to put you so much further ahead of everybody else. So now all you have to do is take action. And of all the things that we talked about, that is the most fundamental and important step of all. And that is one of the things that few people are willing to do, because when you take action, that means you're changing your life. And sometimes we have formed this identity around the things that we believe. Sometimes we form our identity around these ideologies. And if we disrupt that, then we're essentially disrupting our identity. And that can make us very uncomfortable, because sometimes that means changing who we are. It means changing ourselves as a person. And that can be kind of scary. But it's only scary because we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of what comes next. But sometimes if you truly want to make a change, you have to face your fears and you have to do it. So I would ask you, what's holding you back from going after it and doing it?